Service Officer promotion list. As you all know, today's business meeting will be followed immediately by a nominations hearing. Now, I have to make some remarks about today's meetings. We were also set to vote on a number of nominations today, but unfortunately, we have another request to hold over the entire slate of nominees. This has now happened several times this Congress, with all of the requests coming from the same member of the minority. These holdovers are not a game. They can have serious and negative consequences for the State Department, for U.S. personnel, and for our constituents. Just look at two of the nominees from today's list that were held over. Absent the holdover, we would have voted on Gentry Smith's nomination. Mr. Smith is the nominee to head the State Department's Bureau of Diplomatic Security. His nomination has been pending for over 90 days, and it will be further delayed due to this holdover. So I ask, why stop the person whose job it is to keep our people safe? We would have also voted on Rena Bitter, the nominee to be Assistant Secretary of Consular Affairs. Every one of us has constituents who are desperate to get passports and are frustrated by the enormous backlog at the State Department. Ms. Bitter is a proven leader and committed to focusing like a laser on eliminating the backlog. She has been pending in the committee for over 90 days, but she will have to wait longer due to the holdover, and as a result, our constituents will likely have to wait longer as well. For decades, members of this committee have used holdovers sparingly and overall responsibly. Generally, when they have a question that needs to be answered or they need a little more time to engage on the nominee. These constant and blanket holdovers are unprecedented and, in my view, unjustified in this committee. No member of this committee has weaponized the holdover as has happened today and over the last several months. As chairman, I've returned the committee to operating under comity. That means that the ranking member has cleared every item on every markup agenda, including all nominees. Given the extensive minority input that often, understandably slows the process on the front end, it is clear that these holdovers serve no purpose other than delay. They're bad for the country, they're bad for our constituents, and they are testing the bounds of comedy. We now have almost 30 nominees pending in the committee with completed files, and we will likely have more than 50 nominees pending by the end of the August recess. And so I am, it takes some hard work, but I am looking forward to working with the ranking member who has been, I must say, very cooperative and helpful in this regard, and trying to get more nominees up before the committee and hopefully to the floor before the recess. Now, let me turn to the legislative items on our agenda. We have before us today S-2297, the International Pandemic Preparedness and COVID-19 Response Act, S-812, a bill championing Taiwan's observer status in the World Health Organization, and S-Res 310, a resolution expressing solidarity with Cuban citizens and condemning the Cuban regime's latest acts of repression. I'm pleased that we'll be marking up S-2297, the International Pandemic Preparedness and COVID-19 Response Act. Senator Risch and I agreed to collaborate on this bill a few months ago, and today we have before us a bipartisan global health bill that includes a number of important measures to both enhance current COVID-19 response efforts and to ensure that we are better prepared for the next pandemic, whenever it may occur. COVID-19 is continuing to rage in many countries around the world. Most recently, as the Delta variant is showing us, the novel coronavirus continues to pose a threat to American lives and livelihoods as long as it persists anywhere in the world. And as we have learned from the pandemic, this dark chapter in which we have lost so many lives, only with better planning and better preparation here in the United States and around the world can we protect ourselves, our communities, and future generations from emerging pathogens. So I want to thank Senator Risch and his staff for their work on this bill and the dedication to this critical issue. It's one of the issues the ranking member has made a central one with me, and I'm glad that his name goes first on the bill. We'll also be considering S-812, which I introduced with Senator Inhofe in support of Taiwan's observer status in the World Health Organization. Efforts by the People's Republic of China to block Taiwan from gaining observer status at the World Health Assembly are narrow-minded and endanger the international community, particularly as we work to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. This bill makes clear that the United States must do more to champion Taiwan's engagement in the international community, and particularly at the World Health Organization at this time. Finally, we'll be marking up S-Res 310, which I introduced along with Senators Rubio, Risch, Kane, Cardin, and several other members to demonstrate our bipartisan support for the Cuban people. At a time when the Diaz-Canel regime is desperately unleashing a campaign of violence, human rights abuses, and forced disappearances against the Cuban people, we must make sure that U.S. actions are aimed solely at helping the Cuban people and holding the regime to account for its brutality. This is a bipartisan resolution that shows the United States Congress is united in its unflinching support for Cubans' fundamental human and social rights. We are speaking in honor and admiration of the work being carried on by brave freedom fighters in Cuba, and we are making a solemn promise not to ignore the suffering and subjugation of the Cuban people as they inch closer to realizing a future of freedom and prosperity. I look forward to strong support on this and the other two legislative items before that. And with that, let me recognize the distinguished ranking member, Senator Risch.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. This bill, as you pointed out, has been a long time in coming. I started the first draft of this very, very early on in the pandemic when it became obvious that the world really was not equipped to deal with this. We had the World Health Organization that all of us thought would be the appropriate way to respond to this. But this pandemic was different. The WHO had done very good work in helping with PEPFAR and the AIDS epidemic. It did very good work on polio. It did very good work on smallpox. But it was pretty evident right from the beginning that they just they weren't prepared to respond to something that was moving as quickly as this was. So as I started to draft this, I went back and forth on a lot of different provisions, and as most of us would recall, it was pretty political right at the beginning. And the then president weighed in on the WHO, and that raised that issue to a political level that made it somewhat difficult to deal with. I want to thank Senator Murphy. I had the first conversation with him, in which he didn't discourage me, but it was a spirited conversation as to which direction we should go with this. And I kept an open mind throughout as to how we should do this. Then, of course, we've struggled to put a bill together that would be a strong bipartisan bill. This has to be a bipartisan, something of this magnitude. Indeed, it is of the magnitude that at some point in world history, it may be the most important thing that everyone on this committee had done, because this is going to happen again. There's absolutely no question this is going to happen again. And how we respond to it is going to be very important. After the chair changed, Senator Menendez was kind enough to lend his ear to this and his good graces, and we set about, again, resetting the bill and getting it on a bipartisan track that could accomplish what we wanted to accomplish. And what we wanted to accomplish, the object was not rocket science. It was very simple, and that is to have an organization that acted as a fire department, that when the house caught fire, somebody was there to answer the phone and respond. That was the model I set up for this at the very beginning. And I'm pleased to say that I think we've reached that. And I want to thank every member of this committee, whether you vote for the bill or against the bill. Everybody's had thoughts about it. They've had input into it. And people have been very generous in a give and take. Obviously, like every bill, particularly one of this magnitude that passes Congress, there isn't one of us here that would vote for every provision standalone. But together, I think it does do what is an important thing for this Congress to do. We are leading the world on this. The world looks for this. As I talk to people, as all of you do on this committee from all over the world, they all agree that there needs to be a different way of responding than the way responded to this. And so this is important in that regard. This bill elevates the global health as a national security imperative. We know that that's been around for some time as When we look at the world threats on the Intelligence Committee every year, pandemic has always been one of those threats. It's been given kind of short shrift because we haven't had it, but it's been on there. This bill enables more effective diplomatic engagement and program coordination, builds upon the success of other models of effective foreign aid, PEPFAR and the Millennium Challenge Corporation, to ensure that those are examples, to ensure transparency, accountability, self-reliance, and results. We stole every good idea we could from those other models that have been used before. It promotes burden sharing and partnerships through an innovative financing mechanism which incentivizes eligible countries to more effectively identify threats and invest in their own health security, and authorizes funds to carry out a strategic plan with clearly defined roles and responsibilities to help countries close the gaps in health security that keep us all vulnerable to pandemic threats. We all know what happens there affects us here. That has become so obvious and apparent over the last 20 months. I want to thank the chairman and our other co-sponsors, Senator Murphy and Senator Portman, for their important contributions. And again, I want to reiterate every member of this committee who participated in this in one way or another. On the Cuba resolutions and the Taiwan bill, I want to associate myself with the chairman's remarks. And with that, I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Risch. Without objection, we'll now consider in block 5 Foreign Service Officer promotion lists and 2 legislative items. They are PN 359, PN 477, PN 478, PN 724, PN 727, S 812, and S Resolution 310 as amended by the manager's resolving clause amendments. Would any members like to comment on any of these items before the vote? If not, is there a motion to approve these items in block with the resolution as amended by the notice amendment I just referenced?
So moved.
So moved. Is there a second? Second. So moved and second. The question is on the motion to approve the items as amended. All in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed will say no. The ayes have it, and the majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it, and the items as amended are agreed to. Without objection, we'll now consider S 2297, the International Pandemic Preparedness and COVID-19 Response Act. Is there a motion to approve the substitute amendment?
I'll move, Mr. Chairman.
There's so moved. Is there a second? Is there a second to approve the substitute amendment? Senator Cardin.
Thank you for the enthusiasm.
Is very gracious. So moved and seconded. The question is on the motion to approve the substitute amendment. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed will say no. Majority of members having present, having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. At this point, I just want to very briefly just say we are proud of the work that this bill has. I'm pleased that the manager's amendment that we just voted to includes numerous contributions from our colleagues, including Senators Cardin, Coons, Murphy, Markey, Merkley, Schatz, Van Hollen, Rubio, Paul, Portman, and Senator Hagerty, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill. Are there any amendments to this legislation? Senator Paul. Yes.
My amendment would reduce foreign aid by 10%. Foreign aid welfare has been increasing at a rapid rate, over nearly 70% increase over the past decade. Meanwhile, our overall debt approaches $30 trillion. I think it's time we reconsider paving roads overseas and consider paving roads here at home. The author, Dr. M.G. Quibria, in the Georgetown Journal of International Affairs writes, "The history of foreign aid has been inextricably linked with corruption." He quotes Dambisa Mayo, who has a book called Dead Aid, that argues that the root cause of much of the development affliction of Africa can be traced to the large inflow of foreign aid that generates a cycle of corruption that results in slower growth and poverty. All of us have seen the stories where aid has come in and destroyed local markets and destroyed local farmers, but this is not the exception but the rule. Former UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon says that corruption devours about 30% of all development assistance money or aid. If you give more aid, you'll get more corruption. If you give less aid, maybe you'll get less corruption. The Mubarak family is a great example of the corruption of foreign aid. Over a couple of decade period, they got somewhere around $30 to $40 billion. They managed to steal about half of it. The elder Mubarak was estimated to be worth between 15 and 20 billion. Even his kids were estimated to be worth about 5 billion each. This is the history of foreign aid. It's a history of corruption. It's a history of money going from poor people in rich countries to rich people in poor countries. And I think we should consider reducing foreign aid by 10%. And I would ask for a recorded vote.
Is there any senator wishing to be recognized on this amendment?
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Risch.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to vote no on this amendment. I think, first of all, Senator Paul's to be commended. He's been a tireless advocate to review not just foreign aid assistance, but the entire U.S. budget. There is absolutely no doubt that there are things in here that need to be reviewed, that need to be cut out, that need to have sideboards on them, that need to be followed more closely. I think, though, that an across-the-board 10% cut is not the way to do this. I think it needs to be taken on a piece-by-piece basis. But I share his concern. I share his view on the waste and corruption, but I'm going to vote no on this amendment.
Any other member seeking recognition? Very briefly, this amendment caps the fiscal year 22 appropriations for foreign assistance at a specific amount, 10% below FY21 appropriations across all foreign assistance programs. With the pandemic surging here at home, thanks in part to the Delta variant, this amendment would reduce U.S. support for global efforts to combat COVID-19. And if we retreat in this regard, China will fill the void we create. I commend the senator for his constant commitment to making sure U.S. taxpayer dollars are used in the most effective way, but I cannot support this amendment. The senator has asked for a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Cardin? No. Mr. Shaheen? No. Mr. Coons? No. Mr. Murphy? No. Mr. Payne? No. Mr. Markey? No. Mr. Merkley? No. Mr. Booker? No. Mr. Schatz? No. Mr. Van Hollen? No. Mr. Risch?
No.
Mr. Rubio? No. Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Romney? No. Mr. Portman?
No by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Paul?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
No by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Barrasso? Aye. Mr. Cruz? Aye. Mr. Rounds?
No by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Haggerty?
No by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Chairman?
No. The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, the yeas are 4, the nays are 18.
And the amendment is not agreed to. Senator Cardin, I understand you had recognition.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I had an amendment that dealt with Section 107. I'm not going to offer that amendment, but I do want to raise the issue. And first, let me thank the chairman and ranking member, particularly Senator Risch, for all your efforts in trying to reach out and work with all of us on this particular bill. I thank you for the input of allowing some of our issues that we raised to be included in the manager's package. I still have a concern on Section 107, and let me express it because I hope we can work this out as the bill works its way through the United States Senate. Section 107 says governments using the COVID-19 pandemic as a pretense for repression have undermined democratic institutions, debilitated institutions for transparency and public integrity, quashed legitimate dissent, and attacked journalists, civil society, organization activists, independent voices, and vulnerable and marginalized populations, including refugees and migrants, with far-reaching consequences that will extend beyond the current crisis. That's absolutely accurate, and we have to deal with that. And I applaud you for including that section in the bill. It's very important that we do it. You then go on to say that program priorities, including programs to support including programs that support democratic institutions, human rights defenders, civil societies, and freedom of the press, should be targeted to the extent feasible towards civil societies organizations in countries in which emergency government measures taken in response to COVID-19 pandemic have violated internationally recognized human rights. My problem with that section is I certainly want to fund this, but I don't want to take money away from programs that are currently underfunded that are targeting the development of democratic institutions and dealing with problems that we have. I've raised several times that we are not appropriating enough of the foreign assistance programs for good governance, anti-corruption, to deal with the decline of democratic states. And I'm concerned that this language could be interpreted to take money away from that program. Now, I know we have the distinguished chairman of the subcommittee, the senator from Delaware, that's on our committee, and I'm sure he will protect that during the appropriation process. But I just really want to raise the issue that we don't take money away from programs that are already underfunded to meet this very desperate need. I would have been more comfortable if we would have authorized additional funds for this purpose, which I think we should have. And I look forward to working with the chairman and ranking members as this bill goes forward. And I will not press my amendment.
Well, thank you, Senator Cardin. To respond briefly, first of all, I think that's a legitimate concern that you have. We have gone back and forth on funding on this bill to a large degree and settled on what I think is an appropriate number. But that number is written on paper for this year. It is not written on stone. There is no doubt in my mind that if we wind up with another one of these pandemics, that the money we're talking about here is peanuts compared to what we will wind up spending, just like this pandemic is. My idea is I really think this institution will do better if we don't throw a whole bunch of money at it at the beginning that they're trying to spend when they're not really prepared to spend it. It's my idea that this thing get running, we take the training wheels off next year, and then we keep going forward. But I fully intend, and I assume other members of this committee are in the same position, and that is we're going to be looking over the shoulder of this. We're going to be watching what this organization does. It's a new organization because its newness is, as everyone knows, can cause real difficulties sometimes. So I agree with you, but I think I intend to do. I hope to join you in future years as we go forward.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond very briefly. The concern is we're dealing with the general fund foreign aid appropriations that go for democracy institutions. In the American Rescue Plan, there's some funds available, and you've dealt with that in a different section, which I think you've handled the right way. I am concerned about the future appropriations being compromised because there's just not enough funds available for this purpose. Where I want to see this purpose funded, I think we should be looking at how much additional funds are needed or how we reallocate funds in order to meet all these priorities. That's the only reason I raise this. It shouldn't be put ahead of other priorities that are currently being funded that are, in my view, underfunded.
Thank you.
I, first of all, appreciate the senator withholding his amendment. Secondly, if the effect of the language would create the result that the senator is concerned about, then I would share his concern, and we look forward to working with you as we move to the floor to refine it. Any other senators wishing to offer an amendment or recognition? Senator Murphy?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Very quickly, let me thank you for your leadership along with Senator Risch. No small thing to make this substantial bill bipartisan. I appreciate your willingness to work with all of us. In particular, I want to draw our attention to Section 3 of this bill, which sets up some new creative financing mechanisms. This comes from legislation that Senator Risch and I had developed last year, modeled after the Millennium Challenge Corporation, public-private partnerships working with individual nations to use U.S. dollars in order to leverage domestic policy changes, which can strengthen local public health systems. I think that's a smart usage of U.S. taxpayer funds. I did, a couple of amendments I'd offered are in the manager's package, and thank you for that. There did have an amendment relative to funding for the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness that I won't call up, but it is really important that the United States make a substantial contribution to CEPI. I know only half of us voted for the American Rescue Plan, but in that bill, I think it was commonly understood that there was an amount of money set aside for this organization. We we were very fortunate this time around that it was American companies that were able to develop vaccines that right now are saving lives all across the country and the world. CEPI, though, is an international organization that works both in a public and private sector manner to develop vaccines. And it may be the next pandemic comes with a vaccine that is developed through that international group, and the United States should be a substantial player there just to make sure that if we don't develop the vaccine, if the international group does, that we have a seat at the table. And so I look forward to working with the chair and the ranking member on continuing to make sure that we have an adequate contribution, that we are at the table on CEPI's work. And at this time, I won't call for an amendment requiring that contribution to be made, but I look forward to working with folks on that project.
I thank the senator for withholding his amendment, and we look forward to working with you. I share your views on CEPI. Senator Risch.
Very briefly, I thank you, Senator Murphy, for withdrawing that. I think CEPI is going to be a player in this no matter what, and how it works with this new organization will be important. I think we're going to continue to review that as we go down the pike. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Cruz seeks recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I call up Cruz First Degree 2. This is an amendment that would prohibit U.S. participation in the creation of a vaccine passport. And let me say, I think there are a lot of Texans, I think there are a lot of Americans across the country that are very frustrated at the government responses to COVID-19. And I think the decision yesterday by the CDC to reverse its guidance and to mandate masks for vaccinated people is the kind of decision that is infuriating people across this country. I believe the CDC's decision yesterday was politics. It wasn't science. It was a decision that somehow pretends vaccines don't work. The CDC months ago rightly concluded that vaccinated people don't need to wear masks because the whole purpose of a vaccine is not to get the disease. That decision was right. The science hasn't changed. The only thing that has changed is the politics. A year and a half ago, the CDC was one of, if not the most respected scientific and medical organization in the country. Today, the credibility of the CDC is in tatters because leadership of the CDC has been willing to allow science to become politicized. We've seen Dr. Fauci take virtually every position on virtually every subject under the sun. We've seen Dr. Fauci in his emails explain his view that masks don't work and are not effective in preventing COVID-19. We've then seen Dr. Fauci change his positions over and over again. We've seen Dr. Fauci say that when he told people masks didn't work, he actually believed masks did work, but he wanted people not to wear masks because he wanted first responders to have them first. I believe that when government scientists and health experts allow politics to trump the science, it does enormous damage to the willingness of the American people to believe anything they have to say. I think one of the aspects of yesterday's decision that illustrates the arbitrariness of this is the brand new decree that everyone in schools must wear a mask. Doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not, if you enter a school, you must wear a mask. Now, there's no great new scientific discovery that mandates this new edict. Indeed, we've seen throughout this crisis that while COVID-19 can be very, very serious for vulnerable populations, for the very elderly, for those with significant comorbidities, that we've seen the incidence of serious disease with COVID-19 among children is very, very low. And there's no credible demonstration that children are a significant vector for spreading the disease. But CDC nonetheless said anyone who steps in a school must be masked. It's not complicated why. They did so because the teacher union bosses demanded that. That is a political decision. Political players can make political decisions. It wouldn't surprise me to see elected officials deciding I'm going to give the union bosses what they demand, but that is not what the Center for Disease Control should be doing. My view on COVID is it is serious. We should take serious steps to combat it. We have taken extraordinary steps to combat COVID-19, including an unprecedented effort to develop vaccines, hundreds of millions of which have been administered, as we've come together and fought against this disease. But we've also seen stupid policies. We've seen lockdowns across this country that have shut down small businesses, destroyed restaurants, destroyed bars, destroyed generational businesses. We've seen schools shut down, tens of millions of children sent home for over a year. Children who are falling behind academically, who are falling behind in reading, who are falling behind in math. And the children being hurt are disproportionately low income. They are disproportionately Hispanic and African American. And nonetheless, the edicts to shut down schools have continued. They were utterly unjustifiable. My view is simple. We should not have mandates. What does that mean? That means no mask mandates. That means no vaccine mandates. And I will say, you know, it was interesting as I was reading through this COVID bill, Section 107, talking about what foreign governments are doing. An awful lot of the description of foreign governments can apply to our own government. So Section 107 of this bill says certain foreign governments have taken measures in response to COVID-19 that violate the human rights of their citizens without clear public health justification. Well, I think you could delete the word foreign in that, because we've seen governments here domestically arbitrarily exercising power as well. This Section 107 also says governments using the COVID-19 pandemic as a pretext for repression have undermined democratic institutions, check. Debilitated institutions for transparency and public integrity, check. Quashed legitimate dissent. I might remind you that Anthony Fauci in those emails asked Facebook to silence anyone who said anything different than the government directive on speech, including if you suggested the origin of the Wuhan virus was actually at Wuhan, China, in a Chinese government lab. And Facebook willingly complied, censored that view. You're not allowed to have that view that this escaped from the government lab. Then, miraculously, a couple of months ago, the administration was forced to recognize, well, yeah, there's actually very significant evidence that the Wuhan virus escaped from a Chinese government lab in Wuhan, and beyond that it may well have been developed with government research with American taxpayer funding on gain-of-function research. Those views that were banned for a year are now acknowledged as having very significant scientific basis behind them. My view, there should be no mandates, no mask mandates, no vaccine mandates, and no vaccine passports. And what my amendment focuses on is just the last piece of it. Vaccine passports, and I will say finally, this should be a proposition that is bipartisan. The Biden administration at least claims to oppose vaccine passports. Jen Psaki at the White House said, let me be clear on this, I know there's a lot of questions. Psaki said, the government is not now, nor will we be, supporting a system that requires Americans to carry a credential. If that is right, if that is credible, then I would urge the committee to adopt my amendment prohibiting U.S. taxpayer funds from going to or the American government participating in an international body creating a vaccine passport that would be required for Americans traveling abroad.
I have a number of questions and concerns about the substance of this amendment. However, the text of this amendment is clearly outside the scope of the Foreign Relations Committee's jurisdiction. Indeed, the text is drawn directly from S. 1932, a bill sponsored by the senator from Texas that has been referred to the HELP Committee. This amendment prohibits the use of federal funds for the creation of a vaccine passport system or vaccine tracking database, including at the state level, and it requires that COVID-19 vaccination records be destroyed by all federal departments and agencies. Neither of these issues fall within our committee's jurisdiction. Accordingly, I rule this amendment out of order.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I think that jurisdictional argument is not justifiable based on the underlying bill. The underlying bill is about policies engaging on a bilateral basis in response to COVID. This amendment is prohibiting participating in an international organization creating a vaccine passport. This bill talks about vaccine monitoring. And this amendment ensures that we're not establishing a federal government vaccine database that is monitoring U.S. citizens in violation of their privacy rights. This bill talks about enhancing transparency of health data, and I think the amendment would protect the privacy of health data from a vaccine passport. And this bill also talks about establishing partnerships with the private sector to improve pandemic preparedness and response. This amendment addresses the same topic to prevent the U.S. government from working with a third party in the private sector to develop a vaccine passport and force it on the American people. And so accordingly, I appeal the ruling of the chair that the amendment is out of order.
The Senator appeals the ruling of the chair that the amendment is not in order because it is outside of this committee's jurisdiction. The question for the committee is, shall the decision of the chair be overturned? A yes vote means you wish to allow the amendment. A no vote means you agree with the chair that the amendment should not be allowed. As such, I will vote no.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Risch is recognized, and Senator Shaheen.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to support the ruling of the chair. First of all, Senator Cruz makes a passionate and legitimate case about some very clear domestic issues that we're wrestling with. I think every state is wrestling with them. My state's having the same arguments about vaccinations, about passports, about masks, and everything else. But this is a bill dealing with the the creation of an international institution for dealing with these things. It in no way requires the United States or any state or any locality to follow any regulations that are adopted in an international forum. Really, if we're going to get this thing passed, it needs to have bipartisan support of the general proposition that we have here. If we get down into dealing with these that really are, as the chairman points out,
taking a lighter touch than some of the other states. The highest death rate in the world is New Jersey and New York. States with the heaviest touch in the entire world, New Jersey and New York have the highest death rates by far. No one's going to exceed them. As far as the facts of the Delta virus, the Delta variant, Public Health England looked at 92,000 people who got the Delta variant. Many, many articles have shown it to be more transmissible. I don't think anybody disputes that. But when you look at the death rate of the Delta variant, both vaccinated folks and unvaccinated folks who died from it, the death rate was a great deal lower than the wild variant. For those who were vaccinated and over 50, the death rate was about 1.4%. For those over 50 who were unvaccinated, it was about 3.4%. This is much lower than the wild variant. The wild variant above 50 was about a 5 to 6% death rate for all comers last year. So there's a great deal of evidence, but when one side presumes that you know the truth and that, everything says that the Delta variant's more deadly, no, there are facts that on both sides you can argue what science you see and what we see. But the real danger in our country is people presuming to know the truth and calling other senators misinformation. And I presume this would be the argument, well, why don't we shut down Ted Cruz? Why don't we not let him speak at all? That's what's going on in our country. It's not your time. When it's your time, you can have your time back. It's not your time to interrupt. But here's the point. The point is this is going on across America. There are people on your side of the aisle introducing legislation to tell Facebook that my opinion cannot and should not be heard. I quote from scientific literature every day, and you can disagree with it, but the thing is, your side is wanting to take down the argument and have your way imprinted on the American mind with no objection. That goes against everything with regard to free speech that we know of in our country.
The chair will remind members that when they have their time, it's their time, and corrections can be made subsequently. I will take the opportunity to correct the senator with reference to New Jersey. At the height of the pandemic, yes, we did have a high death rate. But now, as a result of vaccinations, where nearly 60% of the population is vaccinated, we have the lowest of any place in the nation. We have the lowest transmission rate, even though we are now facing the challenge of the Delta variants. So everything has to be put in the appropriate context. Senator Kane is asked for recognition. I'll get back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to be brief. I also wanted to make a quick correction of Senator Cruz to go to the point Senator Shaheen mentioned. This isn't about shutting off debate or keeping people from expressing their opinions, but Senator Cruz, at the beginning of his comment, I don't have the court reporter's transcript ahead of me, but he said that the CDC action yesterday to recommend mask wearing, the only thing that had changed was politics. That was what he said. The only thing that justified the CDC's guidance was politics, and that's frankly ridiculous. It's ridiculous because in your comment, you never said anything about the Delta variant. You never said anything about the rising caseload in Texas and Virginia and everywhere. You didn't acknowledge that the Texas Department of State Health Services, before the CDC, is still recommending that people wear masks because of the Delta variant. You can have opinions about the potency of the Delta variant. We can debate those. But when you say that the CDC action yesterday was based purely on politics and was unrelated to the surge in the Delta variant that is hospitalizing people at near record numbers and killing far too many Americans, I just worry about folks who are watching a hearing like this when they think that they're representatives of government are trashing the institutions of government and asserting that they're only acting by politics. When we are in the middle of such a challenging spike in the pandemic, the effect of those comments is to weaken people's belief in the institutions of this country. And these institutions aren't perfect because humans aren't perfect. But I've lived in a military dictatorship. I've seen how other people live, and I just don't feel that we should be needlessly trashing our health agencies as they're trying to recommend in a difficult circumstance ways for people to be safe. This isn't about politics, what the CDC did yesterday. just as the Texas State Health Department's recommendation, which, like the CDC's, is not a mandate. It's a recommendation about how people should stay safe. We're just trying to do the very best we can to keep people safe, and I don't know why folks would want to undermine that.
Senator Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, I just have to push back when we hear accusations from the other side that Republicans have politicized COVID. I mean, go back to March, April, May, June of 2020. Who was politicizing COVID? It's the current president and vice president in their campaign that expressed skepticism over a Trump vaccine. So I can't stand by and let the other side accuse Republicans of politicizing COVID. It's been your side that has done that, and you did it, and you won a campaign. You won the presidency. Congratulations. Now, my point with the agencies is they have not been forthright. Now, I listened to Jen Psaki yesterday. Well, it's all based on data. Okay, show us the data. Be transparent. There is a law on the books that says if 5 members of the Homeland Security Committee, which I formerly chaired, sign an oversight request, the agencies shall. Not, hey, would you kind of maybe do it? They shall turn over the information. We have 5 members of the Homeland Security Committee asking the Health and Human Services Department to turn over the emails from Anthony Fauci unredacted. Unredacted. What we got yesterday was the 4,000 pages of redacted emails. The agencies are not being transparent, and I would argue that that is the reason you're seeing people hesitant. It's not vaccine hesitancy. I held an event in Wisconsin on June 28th with 5 women and a 13-year-old girl who believed they were vaccine injured. The CDC, the NIH, the vaccine manufacturers are ignoring these people. They are casting them aside. They just want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be believed, so that somebody might just acknowledge that maybe it's the vaccine that was the problem, so they can get effective treatment. Where's the ounce of sympathy for the truth? So again, we want transparency. We want data. It's not our side that's politicized this. It's the Democrats that have politicized this. I'm getting tired of hearing the false accusations coming from the other side. I'm getting sick of being attacked for just asking legitimate questions. You know, as long as I've been alive, when it comes to health matters, it's always been stated, get a second opinion. I don't know when all of a sudden the CDC, NIH, and the FDA have become the gods of information, and we should never question their considered judgment. There's plenty of other people who have different views. Those views should be respected, and they should be allowed to be aired. And I totally agree with Senator Cruz. I'm completely opposed to mandates and passports. We've given up enough freedom during this pandemic. It's time for Americans to reclaim their freedom. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Cruz seeks recognition, and then I'm going to call the question. We've had a robust discussion on this. After Senator Cruz, Senator Rich will have an intervention, then we'll have a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Shaheen impugned my integrity, and she claimed falsely that I was somehow suggesting vaccines are not effective. That was an absolute falsehood. Whether it was deliberate or not, I won't speculate. But it is precisely the opposite of what I was saying and have been saying. Vaccines are effective. I've been vaccinated. My wife has been vaccinated. My parents have been vaccinated. My wife's parents have been vaccinated. I've been urging Americans to get vaccinated. But I also believe in individual liberty. I believe in freedom. It's your damn choice whether you get vaccinated. I think it made sense for me in consultation with my doctor, but you have the ability to make your choice. And the irony is, it is the Biden administration that is doing what Senator Shaheen accused me of doing. When they put out, the CDC puts out this rule, even if you've been vaccinated, you got to put a mask on. It is the Biden administration that are telling people vaccines don't work. I actually understand vaccines do work, which is why that is an arbitrary rule
to require people who have been vaccinated to put a mask on. And by the way, we see the kabuki theater here. Everyone here has been vaccinated. As soon as the CDC said that, we saw Democrats putting on masks. Not because the vaccine suddenly stopped working yesterday, but it was working 2 days ago. No, because now it is a virtue signal of submissiveness to wear a mask. I would note none of the Democrats who spoke said one word about my point of the arbitrary demand that everyone in a school wear masks, even though kids have not gotten, by and large, seriously ill or been a provable vector for spreading this disease in significant amounts. This was done because the teachers' unions, the union bosses demanded it politically. But Senator Shaheen also said that our constituents deserve clarity. I agree with that. She described how happy and eager she was when schools required kids to get vaccinated. And you're right, there are vaccine requirements, there are different diseases, and each state can determine what is required concerning vaccines. So in the interest of clarity, I would just ask Senator Shaheen, do you believe there should be a vaccine mandate for COVID-19? And do you believe the government should issue or participate in a vaccine passport? I answer those unequivocally no. And I would ask Senator Shaheen to have the same transparency. Do you support a vaccine mandate for COVID-19? Do you support a vaccine passport?
Has expired. Senator Risch.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm right back to where I started on this thing. The very first time I sat down on the draft of this bill, President Trump had just announced that he had no confidence in the WHO, et cetera, et cetera. It became incredibly political and heated, just as this has become. This bill has nothing to do with mandatory vaccinations. It has nothing to do with the government collecting information on people. And with all due respect to my good friend from Texas, I would respectfully ask that we keep that out of this bill. This is to create an agency, an international agency that will respond differently and better than the WHO responded. We've tried to keep the politics out of this. I think the issues that you've raised are absolutely legitimate issues that should be taken up on a bill that actually deals with that. This bill does not, and indeed under the Rule 15 of the Senate, I have to agree with the chairman that it's not appropriate for this bill. We need to get, I would plead with people to focus on what this bill does and what important thing we're doing here for the world if we get another one of these pandemics. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Look, I think we all believe in liberty. We all believe in freedom. But my freedom to live, when it clashes against those who ultimately choose not to get vaccinated and to put my life and the life of my constituents and the life of my family at risk, that's a clash there of our individual freedoms. The reason for the CDC's announcement is not that vaccines don't work. It's that the Delta variant can be carried even by the vaccinated. And if you care about your fellow man, as the Bible teaches us, then ultimately you would choose to wear a mask so that you mitigate the possibility of infecting your fellow man. That's what the mandate, the recommendation is all about. But in any event, I will remind our colleagues, the question for the committee is, shall the decision of the chair be overturned? A yes vote means you wish to allow the amendment. A no vote means you agree with the chair that the amendment should not be overturned, should not be allowed. As such, I will vote no. All those in favor who say aye will, in essence, say they wish the amendment to proceed. With that,
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
The recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Barton? No. Janine? No. Mr. Coons? No. Mr. Murphy? No. Mr. Kane?
No by proxy.
Mr. Markey? No. Mr. Merkley? No. Mr. Booker? No. Mr. Schatz? No. Mr. Van Hollen? No. Mr. Risch?
No.
Mr. Rubio? Aye. Mr. Johnson?
Aye.
Mr. Romney?
No by proxy.
Mr. Portman?
No by proxy.
Paul? Aye. Mr. Young?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Barrasso?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz?
Aye.
Mr. Rounds?
No by proxy.
Mr. Haggerty?
Aye by proxy.
Chairman?
No. The clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, the yeas are 7, the nays are 15.
The decision of the chair is not overturned. The amendment is not in order on the committee. Is there anyone else seeking recognition? Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to go to a completely different part of this, which is whether we're being ambitious enough in this bill. I'd like to enter in the record a letter from 60 health and advocacy organizations that is addressed to President Biden, and we've been provided with copies here in Congress. And they lay out the vision that I think is consistent with this bill, that we need to aggressively help the world take on this disease, that we have a huge stake from a humanitarian perspective, we have a huge stake from an economic perspective, and we certainly have a huge stake from our own healthcare perspective, because as long as the disease is raging around the world, it's going to be returning to the U.S. in all kinds of ways and affecting us here, including our health and our economy. These groups laid out a vision that I put into my first-degree amendment number 3, which I will not ask for a vote on, but I want to make the point that they're saying. They're saying for us to be able to have a significant impact on this disease around the world, it will take about a $25 billion investment. And furthermore, distribution expenses add up to not another $9 billion, and so they suggest a investment of $34 billion. And I'm glad we've increased the number from $3 to $5 billion in this bill, but I want to point out that I haven't found any analysis that shows that $1 billion per year over the next 5 years is at all adequate to the incredible challenge before us. I do appreciate that 2 of the points made by these groups have been adopted notionally into the bill. One is that we have to support the establishment of regional manufacturing hubs around the globe. And second, that we need to facilitate technology sharing and licensing of intellectual property necessary to ensure adequate and timely supply of vaccines and vaccine components. So these 2 ideas are incorporated into the bill, but it's going to take a lot more resources. Think about where we are right now, and that is that only 1.1% of individuals in low-income countries have received a single dose, meaning almost 98% have received no doses at all. The current strategy, we will not reach widespread vaccination until 2024. That means years of this disease raging around the world and returning to the United States of America. Even this process is one in which, we have a big stake. And this bill, philosophically, is on the right track, but I need to emphasize that we're going to have to think much more boldly, much more aggressively, if we're going to tackle this challenge, and that the United States is really the country that has the influence, the ability to lead the world in this effort, and thus we should ponder it in that context, that no other country is going to step forward and lay out the vision to aggressively do this. This bill lays out a vision. We need to put a lot more horsepower behind it if we're going to fulfill that vision.
Without objection, the senator's request for letters will be included in the record. Appreciate the senator's views, and we look forward to working with you in the appropriation and other process to have as robust a presence as possible. I'm going to observe the 5-minute rule for any other comments and amendments in order that we have a panel that's been waiting before us. We have colleagues who are waiting to introduce them. Is there anyone else seeking recognition or to offer an amendment? If not, is there a motion to approve S 2297 as amended? So moved by Senator Risch. Is there a second? Second is by Senator Cardin. The question is on the motion to approve S 2297 as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed will say no. No. The ayes have it, and the legislation is agreed to. With that, the resolution is agreed to. That completes the committee's business. I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make technical and conforming changes without objection so ordered. With that, the committee will stand adjourned. We will reconvene for today's nominations hearing.
We never talked about it.